Thomas Green here with Ethical Marketing Service. On the podcast today, we have Sunil Godse. Sunil, welcome.
Welcome. Thank you so much for inviting me on this great podcast show, and happy to drop some knowledge bombs or nuggets of wisdom on intuition.
We are happy to have you. Maybe start a bit about yourself and anything we should know.
Yeah, so my name is Sunil Godse. I'm the CEO of Radical Solutions Group, and I'm in the intuitive branding space. And what that does is it takes the power of the subconscious phenomenon we're all born with called intuition, and I help business owners leverage it to create a trust with their employees and their customers. And with the research showing that this trust happens in under 14 seconds, that's how quickly you're able to win their engagement in your brand. And when that happens, then you actually strip them away from your competition, which gets you to eliminate them again in under 14 seconds. And I've been doing that for years.
That's quite a promise, that one, eliminating your competition in under 14 seconds. If someone wants to know more, what would you say?
Yeah, so if you go to sunilgodse.com, there's an explainer there as to why this happens, and I introduce some research there. And then I've got a webinar that takes people a deeper dive into all my intuitive branding services, because it's really about leveraging your intuition in various parts of your business, in your hiring, in your operations, even in the data, the stats, and in your case, in your world, marketing. And what are those messages that are really resonating with your customers or potential customers at an intuitive level or an emotional level? And when you start crafting your messaging around that, that's when they start to deepen their engagement with their brand. And as long as there's consistency from stop the scroll to what you're delivering in your products or services, you deepen that engagement further, which leads to a purchase. And then if you continue that customer journey in a genuine way, you get multiple purchases.
You use the term intuitive branding. Have you got a definition that you use?
Yeah, so intuitive branding is essentially, again, using the power of intuition to trigger the emotional response in customers and employees. So if you look at employees, for example, with the great resignation that we have today, this is now one way of looking at it, which I think is the right way of looking at it, is that no longer are employees wanting to be treated like numbers. And they're now essentially voting their time with, where they're going to be valued. And the old command control style, short-term focus, thinking from the leaders is not working anymore. And if we look at the statistics, now, 85% of employees are unhappy in their jobs. And of that 85%, which is by Gallup, 20% of those are actually stealing from you. And so from an employee perspective, when you start to treat them like people and allow them to be creative and trust them to use their skills, and you're very genuine in your approach, then what happens is you've got a two-way trust relationship that's established. And when you look at the science behind trust and intuition, which happens in the amygdala is your fight or flight response. So either you're a threat to them or not, essentially. That trust starts in as little as 33 milliseconds. And so it's constantly watching to make sure that you actually do value them and that your actions match your words, and you actually care about who they are. And that solidifies that trust. And from 33 milliseconds, it goes anywhere from 10 to 14 seconds for them to exchange some time, effort, or money with you to say, yep, this is where I want to stay. And I'm hoping that we've all worked for people who we've loved working for them. We've loved working for that company. If you look at what we buy, why do we buy certain things, certain brands? If it's cheaper, that's great. But if there's something of value, there's that emotional trigger to us that has us wanting to buy that. And the job or the role of marketing in this case for customers is to make sure that your messaging resonates with that value. Right. And from an employee's perspective, you got to make sure that the way you lead resonates with that value to them. And that's where the science comes in. That's where intuitive branding comes in, because the brand is really in the eyes of those who see you as a brand, who trust you as a brand. And then your employees, if they trust you as a brand, they're going to stick with you. And if your customers trust you as a brand, then they're going to want to buy from you. So the brand is really established in how you treat others, before you start looking at colors and logos and things like that, because colors and logos are an important element. But what I find is that businesses start because they trust themselves for the logo, but they haven't established a brand yet. So the logo doesn't mean anything to anybody. The color doesn't mean anything to anybody yet. And so you have to make sure you get that process right. So focus on the relationships first, and then you can start working on these other sort of subsidiary things that might help increase that awareness of that brand.
You mentioned from the customer perspective and also the employee perspective. Do you tend to focus on both, or is it a balance, or one more than another?
So in the intuitive branding process, there's basically three phases that I look at. And the first phase is really looking at yourself. So let's get you to strengthen your intuition. And when I looked at the research in intuition, there's actually 4 types of intuition that work together. And they send you a bunch of signals. So if we dive into the sort of the science of what intuition is, to start, if we look at, if it's like driving a car. So when you drive a car, you turn the keys, you press on a button, and you hear the engine whir. And as long as it's whirring okay, you drive off. And that's very, very similar to the signals that your intuition sends you. And there's 2 types of signals. There's positive signals and negative signals. Obviously, the positive signals are the ones saying that the decision that you're about to make is the right one. And a negative signal is saying the decision that you're about to make is the wrong one. And what's more interesting with positive signals, they tend to be more sort of a sense of flow. It just feels easy to make that decision. Whereas a negative one, it actually is a little uncomfortable. So it's sometimes in the gut feeling, or you hear that voice that's trying to talk you out of something, or something doesn't feel right. Those are your negative signals that are coming at you to say, hey, listen, you got to watch what decision you're about to make. And so those are the easiest ways to figure out, whether you're making the right decision or not. Now, in that same car analogy, we're not all mechanics. So for me to drive a car, I don't need to pop open the hood to know that there's a gear ratio and oil and et cetera, et cetera. I just need to drive the car. But when I popped open the hood, so to speak, when it came to intuition, there's actually 4 types of intuition that I looked at when I looked at the research. And I interviewed over 1,000 people to collect all this data. And the best way I can explain the four types of intuition is by going through a case study of one of my very first interviewees, who is a non-believer in intuition. So he's a friend of mine, and I asked him, his name is John Rosta. I said, John, would you do an interview on intuition? Now, this is a guy who's been an investment banker for 25 years, and so data, the numbers, certainty, all that stuff ruled the world. And at that time, if you Googled intuition at that time, it was more about, voices from God and coming from the cosmos and, sort of the woo-woo type of descriptions, which is fine if people think that's what intuition is. But in his mind, it just didn't exist. And he said, Sunil, you know what, come down. I'll give you the interview. I have no clue what we're going to talk about because this stuff just does not exist. So we'll talk about intuition for 5 minutes and then let's just catch up. So I'm driving down to see him with my camera equipment. I'm going, boy, this is going to be a really short interview. I don't know how to stretch this over to an hour. And so I actually turn on the camera and he's just like, yeah, intuition, I'm not sure. And then there were a couple of signals that I had from other entrepreneurs I've interviewed. And one of them had his left earlobe getting hot that was one of his negative signals. And another CEO had an omen that popped up on his right shoulder. And he's run 2 multi-million-dollar businesses based on this intuitive signal. And so, I could see John sort of rolling his eyes saying, yeah, I'd like to shake their hands, but I don't get it, right? And then he says, listen, every decision you have in business is based on your learning or experience. And so now this is how I'm going to start diving deep into the 4 types of intuition. One of the 4 types is called experiential intuition. And so you're actually born with intuition. There was a science study done that showed that infants as young as 2 months old had shown to have intuitive tendencies. And so when you're born, you have 5,000 to 6,000 experiences per day. When you're older, 28,000 to 35,000 experiences per day. Every single piece of that experience is a data point that goes into the subconscious area of your brain. So if you look at your brain like an iceberg, 90% below water, 10% above water, You've got billions and billions and billions of data points that have gone into the subconscious area of your brain like a library for your intuition to pull from. And so when you're about to make a decision today in business or in your personal life, you have a huge library of experiences that have worked and that have not worked. And that's what your intuition uses to start with some of the signals to say, okay, listen, Thomas, you made that decision in the past. That was great. Here's a positive signal to tell you, yep, you can definitely go ahead with that decision. Or Sunil, you're trying to make a decision that really kind of didn't work in the past. Here's a negative signal that I'm going to send you. And if you don't pay attention to me, this first negative signal, I'm going to send you a louder one and a louder one until you finally start listening to me. And one of the CEOs I interviewed, he was running a 9-figure company, and he continued to ignore his his intuition. And he was in the back of an Uber, and the words just popped out, "You're going to quit." It was a negative signal that was brewing and ended up getting louder. He goes into the boardroom, again, 9-figure mortgage company at the top of its game. He says, "I'm quitting. I'm sorry." And he just said, that's just what I feel. And so luckily he got out, and 6-8 months later, the market crashed and the company came down. So that's kind of how these positive and negative signals work. And it's the experience that's there. And this is one of the misconceptions of intuition, because I think people think that it just comes from somewhere, but it actually is deep in data and experience. And so what I was telling John is that sometimes your intuition will tell you to go against the data. And he goes, "Sunil, that's funny that you mentioned that. I have an exact case study for that." And I said, "Well, please tell me what happened." So John was in the business of putting franchise locations in. And so there was one location that his team looked at that was in a really crappy area of Toronto. And so they used a scale out of 10. A 9 out of 10 meant that they would put a franchise in like McDonald's or Wendy's or Burger King, whatever it is. Anything less than that, it just wasn't a good location when they looked at things like demographics, traffic sources, and things like that would make, development in the area. John went to that area, and now we're going to talk about the second of the four called situational intuition. He was looking at this situation. He was just looking around, and he goes, something's telling me that the data is wrong. Something is telling me that the team is wrong. And we've all been in that situation. We walk into a room, or we just kind of get the spidey sense that something's off. That's your situational intuition working. And so he decides to say, nope, I'm going to go against the team's data. And he puts a location there. That ended up being something called the beer market, which was the most profitable of the brand names that he had under his portfolio, because he went against the data. And now John's also saying, perhaps this was intuition. I'm not sure. So we're now going from intuition doesn't exist to at least I've got him to acknowledge that perhaps it exists. So I'm kind of winning the game in this video interview. I'm thinking. And then at some point, his purpose changes. He says, I no longer want to be an investment banker anymore. I want to actually run a business. And now we're going to get into the third of the four called relational intuition. And what relational intuition does is it takes a look at the people around you and filters them to only allow those on the inside who you're going to actually trust and listen to, who really care about your success. And you and I have met probably tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people in our lifetime. And I probably have two or three that I can absolutely trust in my inner circle to have my back. And most people can have it on their one hand. And so in John's case, when he made that decision, all the people who he was surrounded with were more concerned about ego, money, fame, private jets, restaurants, all the fixings of a $3 to $4 million a year salary. And they all told him he was nuts. Only one person actually asked him why, and that was his wife. And he looked at his wife and he said, this just feels right. That was his intuitive signal. And so he trusted his wife. His wife said, yeah, if it feels right to you, then go ahead. And right after telling that story, now I'm paraphrasing John, because the last of the four is called creative intuition. This is the one that actually makes you take the decision. And creative intuition looks at the risk level. So if you're eating a sandwich and turning left at the traffic lights, creative intuition is not really high. But in John's case, his intuition was saying, you would think his intuition was saying, okay, here's a beautiful, robust business with great cash flows and high revenues and a fantastic balance sheet. That's the business you should take over, not his intuition. His intuition says, John, you're going to run this tiny bankrupt little restaurant. And now I'm paraphrasing John after an hour into our interview. He said, Sunil, sometimes you can have all the data in the world, but you have to trust your intuition. And he made the decision to enter that tiny bankrupt little restaurant after quitting his $3 to $4 million a year job. And that tiny bankrupt little restaurant ended up being a franchise called Eastside Mario's, which was location number 1. And over the next 20 years, he grew that one location to over 1,000 under different brand names, $2 billion in revenues by the time he retired just before our interview, all because it felt right. And so that's the power of intuition when you use it in business. This is how, and I completely turned him around in an hour. And so all I did was I made him understand how intuition worked for him, how he defined it, what his signals were, how he saw the 4 types. And so when you look at my intuitive branding services, I'm coming full circle to my original point, was that I get you to understand how intuition works for you. So what are your signals? And we're normally, based on our experience, we're normally we're really strong in one of the 4 types of intuition. And so we're really good at picking up that particular type's intuition's signals. But that also means we're weaker in the other 3 types of intuition, which means that even when they are warning you with a signal, either, let's say I'm really good in experiential intuition, but if my relational intuition is warning me about somebody I'm about to do business with who is not straightforward, or the situation is bad, or the decision I'm making is not the right decision, it's too risky. Those 3 types of intuition, one of them may be sending me a negative signal, but because I'm weaker in them, I don't know what that signal is. So I'm now going to make a decision that's going to put me in trouble. And so what I do is the first thing I do with intuitive branding is I get you to understand, okay, let's strengthen the other 3 types of intuition. Let's recognize your inventory of intuitive signals. Now you're ready to go. And once you understand how intuition works for you, the next step is to understand how it works for others, because now you know that they also have 4 types of intuition. You also know that they also have intuitive signals, and you're also able to pick up now on when they're not telling the truth, or when they're being deceptive, or when you're making a decision that's not the right one. Their feedback from their behavior, their body language, their tone, how they make decisions is going to trigger your intuition to know whether you're on the right track or if they're being deceptive. And so the first thing, once I get you to understand how your intuition works, then I start working inside the company with the people you lead and making sure that you have the right people in place. You get rid of the people who are cancers in the organization. And then you actually start to lead them by being empathetic, by being open and honest, and letting them trust you and gaining that trust. And once you have that inside the organization, you work on your hiring and the new people coming in, and then you shift to your marketing because the hiring, when you have the right employees in your organization, they're the ones that are going to help you make your operations smooth. And they're the ones that are going to help you in that when you're ready to scale. They're the ones that are going to be involved in helping you with that. And they're also the ones that are going to create the marketing. They're also going to be the ones that are going to keep the customers happy. So that's the next shift after you work with the hiring, the operations. Then we switch to marketing. And then from your marketing, we were talking earlier about deepening that engagement through trust-based messaging, where you actually talk about the problems that you're solving, your product service solve, rather than just saying, hey, listen, these are my features. This is what we do. So changing your marketing, looking at where your customers are spending their time. So using tools such as like SparkToro or things like that, where or you look at Reddit or things like that, or Quora, and you want to take a look at where your customers are spending their time and what problems are they addressing that are directly linked to your products and services. That's how you start molding your marketing around that. And that triggers them at an intuitive level because they're saying, okay, this company actually gets me and they get the problem I'm trying to solve. And now you've triggered their trust at an intuitive level to say, let me pay attention to that company. And then that's going to deepen their engagement. And then finally, we work on sales and that customer journey. So after that first purchase, how do we continue that conversation? And now that we understand how intuition works for us and others, we'll know how to guide that customer, whether one sale is good enough and we're not being pushy, or does that customer actually need something else in our repertoire of products or services that's going to enhance their life in some way? Let's show that to them because it's genuine, because it's a natural evolution in their thought process that, yeah, I bought this from this company. Absolutely, this is something else that I need. And so that gets you to really kind of use your intuition to guide the customer to make sure that he or she buys as much as they need to enhance their value. And this is where your sales tactics are going to be really, really important. And once you've got all that done, now you're ready to scale. And scaling becomes really easy. And so I take people through a 12-month coaching program. So I have a course that I've developed where it gives you the basic nuggets of intuition and working on yourself with some worksheets and case studies. And then I've got a customized coaching program that integrates with that course to actually take that coursework and actually implement it and customize it for your business. With the ones that I've helped, I've got. And of course, there are people that don't want me to tell their names because they've got their customers not wanting to know that they've got my services. But of the ones that have been able to give me a testimonial on my website, they collectively have added more than $1 million to their bottom line. So this is intuitive branding in action, and there's a number of people willing to talk about how these have actually helped them increase $200,000 or $100,000 or triple their customer base or what have you.
Well, there was definitely some knowledge bombs in that answer. So thank you very much for the
no
detailed,
problem.
Explanation. I'm sure you've been asked this before on the topic of intuition. Do you think that there are people who have good or bad intuition? Because I've heard it said that, my intuition is great, or, and you often see people who perhaps do things that they shouldn't, and maybe their intuition told them or guided them to do it. What are your thoughts there?
Yes, and I think this is where intuition is not really understood. I think when you actually really understand what intuition is and you have those signals, you know that they're making the right decision. And a really great example of this is I interviewed Mark Metry, and Mark Metry has, I think he's got a really popular podcast. And so in Mark's case, he ended up almost taking his own life in high school. Even though this guy was making 5 figures as an entrepreneur, even in high school, and on the external surface, everybody would say this guy looks successful, but internally, this guy was just a mess, and he was trying to fit in. And so in my podcast interview with him, when we were talking about this, he was saying that my intuition led me down the wrong path, and it got me to lie to myself so much in high school that I didn't know who I was, and I wanted to take my own life. And then I just stopped him and I said, well, Mark, actually, if we were to, and I was listening very carefully to his interview. And I said, well, actually, Mark, if we were to go back to the podcast interview, and I was able to reverse what right from the start, when you started telling me the story, what you actually said was that I knew I shouldn't have lied, and then you continued down. And so your intuition was actually probably active in the podcast interview saying, no. I knew I shouldn't have lied, but I went against my intuition and I started to do this. Now, of course, I'm blowing this up. This is not going through his head. He's not saying, oh, my intuition is saying something. But what happens is there's a couple of things. One is our intuition actually sends us a signal to say, don't do it. But we are so emotionally laden or emotionally heavy that we go ahead and make that decision and we override the signals. Or it could be one of the cases where you're just weaker in one of those types of intuition, right? And a relational intuition is a real big one. So those going to in business, or every single time they've had a bad partner of those people I've interviewed, 100% of the time, they knew that something was up before they got into the trouble that they did. Those people who shouldn't have gotten into a relationship, 100% of the time of those I've interviewed knew at the very start when something happened, they should have gotten out of it. So when we reflect back on, first of all, understanding what intuition is and understanding that there are signals that we pay attention to. And when we go back, we all say, you know what? There was a signal. And this is the way the signal happened. I'm just formalizing it. So what my role is to do is to say, okay, you have these signals. Let's first take a look at, again, strengthening the 4 types of intuition so that you know what each of these signals are. And because intuition is one of those things that are just great to put on social media, trust your gut. Everybody says, trust your gut. Well, I mean, gut is one of those signals. Maybe your first signal is, the hairs on the back of your neck standing up. And so I think we've gone away from understanding what intuition truly is and taking a deep dive, which is what I did, to rather than just having something like, trust your gut and my intuition led me down the wrong path. If I was to go back to each and every single person and interview them about that statement and go back to the first time that they made that, I can guarantee you with 100% accuracy that there was an intuitive signal saying, don't do it.
Interesting. I think I wanted to talk to you about an example you gave, which was the difference between intuition and perhaps conscience. So would you say that they cross over or the same thing?
Yeah, I would say that they're the same thing. So intuition is the same thing as, self-awareness. People talk about self-awareness, consciousness. In some cases, manifestation gets put into it. So it all depends, and I'm generalizing, of course, but what intuition really does allows you to do is, again, take a look at what's happened in the past, look at pattern matching. And when you take the time to really kind of reflect on, okay, what's the right decision for me? And you take the time to listen to those signals, those signals are going to tell you what the decision is or not, the right decision and the wrong decision. So some people may call it consciousness. Some people might talk about that their voices from God. Some people say, I had a former NHL coach who said these are signals that came from the cosmos. So my role is to say, I really don't care how you define what intuition is. That's for you to do it if that makes you happy in what you want to do, right? And how you want to couch it. My job is to say, okay, you're going to get these signals. You can tell me whatever that I don't care if what origin you want those signals to come from. I'm giving you a scientific way of explaining it, but I can also give you a religious way of saying it as well. If you want to use voices from God, okay, great. Then voices from God are telling you that take this path or don't, and those are the signals you hear. If it's a level of consciousness, self-consciousness or self-awareness, it's taking the time to really kind of listen to yourself, go deep, do the inner work. Again, some more common terms that I've heard out there. Doing deep, going to inner work is taking the time to cut out the noise and think about what decisions you're about to make. And does that make you feel right to move ahead? Does that give you the flow to pull, or is there a resistance? And so once again, those are still tied or analogous to the positive and negative signals. And so, and because from the science, it hits the amygdala, there's no capacity for language. So you actually really define it in however you want. And so I'm not here to shove a definition down anybody's throat. It's you define it however you want. I'm just saying, pay attention to these positives and negatives because they're there for a reason.
You coming back to your relational example where someone said that they gone into business with someone and it ended up being bad. Let's say you have that particular example. Do you teach like a decision-making process in terms of how about you tackle that?
Absolutely. So if you look at the 4 types of intuition, those 4 types of intuition end up being a template for every single decision you make. So, and that starts right at the start of you strengthening the 4 types of intuition. And then now you have this template. So when you take this template, what happens is you remove the emotional aspect of this going in. I mean, there's a lot of people go into it because they're emotionally really excited. Somebody says, I'm going to 2x your business. We can partner up. I'm your friend. I get it. You get giddy. There's a lot of emotions that run really wild when it goes to partnering up with someone. And then when you take the 4 types of intuition, let's just take a look at, I'll use one example. Someone who, she was running a store, and somebody else wanted to wholesale her item. Well, she wanted to retail her items, and she said to wholesale it. And it was exciting. She said, oh yeah, my business is going to grow. And so if you look at the 4 types of intuition, so if you look at the experience, so let's say relational intuition, does this person have the right experience? And so you might emotionally say, oh yeah, okay, yes, because I'm so convinced that this person is the right one. Okay, let's take a look at experiential intuition. Experiential intuition. Have you ever wholesaled before? And you haven't. And was there a risk level? And do you really need to grow that fast? And when I was interviewing her, she was saying, yeah, not really. Let's look at the situation. Are you okay with your business now? Is it profitable? Yes, it is. And if you look at the creative intuition is this a risky decision? Is this is a risky decision? Yeah, it is. And then in the relational intuition, what it does is says, okay, can you trust this person? Have you done enough background checks on this person? Rather than just listening to what she's saying and getting excited by taking the emotions out. And turns out that this person didn't have a history of running good businesses. She actually had a history of doing the same thing to people, where she actually, what ended up happening is they partnered, and then she got in the inventory, and then one weekend, this person walks in, the inventory was gone. And this person had stolen all the inventory and sold it. And turns out when this person did her homework finally on this person, she had done this to a number of other people. So had you used the 4 types of intuition to really kind of take the template, the emotions out of that decision, you would have had a lot more balanced approach to partnering with that person. And so every single time I've had somebody on, I've interviewed or I've coached where they've had an issue with somebody else, there was always a negative signal from one of those 4 types of intuition. They've just chosen to ignore that signal because they were so excited at the opportunity of running an Excel spreadsheet in their head with a lot of revenues going high. And it didn't work out, right? Because they failed to look at the warning signs that were there already. And even when you talk to other people, you got to take a look at their body language, their tone, their experience, right? You can use the 4 types of intuition on them to see, do you have a balanced approach to them? Do they have the right experience? Have they been in similar situations? How are the people that they're mentored by or they're associated with? Are they business people? Are they savvy enough? And who are they associating with? And so you can use the 4 types of intuition as a blueprint. And had that blueprint been put on this other business partner, the person I interviewed would have quickly seen that her history, her experience, the experiential intuition would have triggered something saying, she's done this before. There's some lawsuits. I think I better back away. And so the 4 types of intuition give you a really good template. And once you understand it, how it works for you and the signals and the types of decisions that you had to develop the 4 types of intuition on a template that I give you, which is through a worksheet that you fill in, you can use that each and every single time for any decision you make, and it gives you a whole well-balanced decision. And even for my kids, I tell them to do the same, not in so formal terms. I'm still young, 10 and 15. But I've used that same template for my younger daughter, who started a nonprofit business at 12. And so if you see the paintings behind me, those are hers. So she sells art to raise money for disabilities and illnesses. And in the last 2.5 years, she's raised over $30,000 to do that. But it's really kind of talking her through the 4 types of intuition to make the decisions that gets her success. And so she's 15 years old, $30,000 in, and she has a podcast as well, where she's got people that she's interviewing, like former FBI people, for FBI agents. Just had a billionaire early this week, where she interviewed on the podcast, other artists, just to find how art and creativity are in their lives. But again, so age doesn't matter, right? I've taught my 10-year-old, she wants to run a business because her older sister is, and I said, you have to be serious. You have to raise $500 and she wants to do bookmarks to encourage reading because way too many kids have their noses stuck in phones and devices. And so I said, okay, raise $500 if you're serious. And she did it in 5 days. And she had a couple of Zoom sessions. She Zoomed with one of my buddies and another podcast interview I had. They both gave her $100, right? So, I mean, this stuff kind of works. It doesn't matter what age, but you really tap into that. I mean, intuition just really propels you forward and opens up the doors of opportunity by avoiding some of the things that are going to take you down. And that's how important the 4 types and the signals are.
Well, yeah, your kids have got a good consultant that they can talk to. So, and
I never get paid though.
Yeah,
I just don't get
silent partner maybe.
There's other ways. I get some muffins and cookies and lots of love and stuff. So that's invaluable, of course.
The template that you were referring to, is that like an attempt at almost like a peer review?
It's like a
peer review.
Yeah, it could be seen as a peer review. Yeah, absolutely. So in one way, yeah, and it just gives you a really good, well-balanced approach to take a look at the 4 different areas that I found really, really important and that I've also used when it comes to consulting with other companies, right? So I took one company from $400,000 almost in the hole. They were on the way down to $3.5 million in 2 years just by using this template, right? So yeah, they were in massively in trouble. There was no trust between the CEO, the 2 co-CEOs and the rest. And they were struggling with cash flow and they had about 6 months to live. They hired me to come on and said, Sunil, you got to fix this. And so the first thing I do in a struggling cash company is I raise the salaries of the people there. And so now the co-CEOs are going, oh my God, like who did we just hire? But luckily the contract was there for at least a year. And I was tied to a performance. And I said, if I don't do well, I get paid very well at all. And so what I ended up doing is because they were they were not paying their employees well at all. They were lower than market rates. All I did was I got them market rates and slightly higher to say, you are valuable. And then once I did that, I started to talk to the employees to say, okay, how do we fix this company? And when I brought them in, I listened to what they had said. And then the next step is I implemented what they said. And all along the way, their intuition is looking to see if I'm a charlatan or am I the real deal here? And all along the way over the next year, they said, yeah, we can trust this guy. Like he got us respectable amount of money. He's taking our suggestions. He's involving us in decisions and what to do and what not to do. He really cares. And then what happened is over a year, we fixed the company. And then that in the second year, I was allowed to actually work on expansion. And what happened is now the employees took care of the operational side. And then they're actually, when I expanded to other locations, they took care of the operational side of that. And so we were able to quickly grow to $3.5 million. And when it came to knocking out the competition, which is what my tagline is, what ended up happening is that we started running, these are healthcare companies, locations where there was massage and physiotherapy and orthotics and things like that in one location. The average location at that time was making, in Ontario, Canada, was making about 250,000, maybe 400,000 on the top end, if you were lucky, per location. Our locations were coming in once we fixed things at $1 million plus. And we started to get phone calls from the local healthcare companies saying, you guys have taken my employees. My customers are now coming to you because they're spending their insurance money at your place or they're paying out of pocket. And they're coming in clumps because they enjoy the camaraderie we had. We had such a fun environment. And so a number of people start telling other people. And at one time, we had one police officer in one town who ended up telling the other police officers. Within 6 months, we had probably about 80% of the police officers in that town coming to us, just us. And there were probably 6 or 7 other locations doing the same thing that we did. So that's the power of really kind of when you treat people and you have that trust with your employees and your customers, they support you. And then, now these competitors are calling saying, can you buy my assets at least? Because I got to have something while I'm going down. Right. And we were able to peel away the competitors They became dominant in the markets they were in. And when I left after a couple of years, basically they had a $10 million plan to expand in some of the markets I already indicated with a game plan already. And so that's how you accelerate your success. That's how you knock out your competition. And it all started with me just starting to have people trust me. And then once they trusted me, they helped other customers because they were having such a ball. And we were an amazing team. And in my mind, that's how you grow a business.
Great answer. You mentioned earlier, and I have to ask you about it, is about the first impressions in 33, was it milliseconds?
33 milliseconds, correct.
Now, I've said previously, I don't make a great first impression. I grow on people over time. So now that with all your knowledge on intuition, how do you make a better first impression?
So in your case, there's one thing that intuition does really, really well is that it establishes a baseline. And so, so you and I have different personalities. You're a little bit more reserved, and I'm a little bit more upbeat. It could be because of the caffeine as well. But in that, the first 33 milliseconds, your intuition is hard at work establishing a baseline. And where the trust versus the non-trust comes in is the detraction to that baseline. So if you come in as a very introverted person, or very conservative, people's intuition will understand that that's the baseline. And so anything detracting from, even if you have a little bit of excitement, it's okay. But let's say you go from being super introverted and then you're really extroverted on stage, or you're very animated in a business meeting, or you're saying things that you normally wouldn't say, or your body language is, away from them. And, because intuition is picking up on body language, twitches on your face, like there's 7 micro expressions you can't get around. And so your intuition, again, in 33 milliseconds, is assessing a lot of this to say, what's the detraction from what I knew is true north for this person? And when that detraction becomes a botheration, because your intuition says, this is not Thomas. That's not normally the language he uses. When he comes into a meeting, he usually looks at us and then greets us. Today, he's looking away and he's slowly getting to meet us. There's something bothering him. So these are the detractions away from the base that is telling someone's intuition that something's up. Now, if it's a piece of bad news or you're just having a bad day, your intuition will look for other clues. Right. And so if it's something, it's bad news, we're anticipating what's he going to say that's bad. Maybe you lost a big contract, or you didn't like my performance, or whatever it is. Or if you're having just a bad day, perhaps when you're walking away, you'll just sigh or you'll hold your temples or what have you. But your intuition is looking at the behaviors to say, okay, perhaps subconsciously you're saying, perhaps he's having a bad day. Maybe he had a bad phone call, whatever it is, but it's not directed at us. Now, I'm slowing things down a lot. Right. But I'm taking you through some of the slices of things that your intuition looks at. And so, you may not make a good impression at the start, but, if I'm looking to your marketing services, I don't really care about it's great to have a bad impression. What can you do for my business? How are you helping me further my message? And when that happens, I really don't care if you're extroverted or introverted. I love you because I trust you. You've understood my message. You're taking me in my business. You really care about what I want. It's not about the numbers. You have a good engaging team. Like I'm taking all this information in, and then all of a sudden, your first impression, who cares? Because you get me. Right? I've got friends who are super introverts. I've got friends who are super extroverts. But it's our relationship that matters. It's not, what that first impression is. So, and in some cases, I think when we talk about first impressions, sometimes that becomes a talking point, right? And that we hammer away on that talking point when it's really not that important. And I think research is like that, right? I think research kind of pins you into, a certain thing. That's one of the things when I look at academic research, I look at, okay, where did the data come from? Who did they interview? How valid is this? Right? Because you can say, and I was telling my daughters this as well. I don't know why I talk to my daughters about data when they're so young, but there's one where you see on the toothpaste, 3 out of 4 dentists say that that this is the toothpaste you should have. Let's just put that's marketing messaging for one of the big companies. Okay, so did they actually interview 3 dentists out of 4 in a room and they fed them with nice desserts before and say, yeah, and they had groupthink. Yeah, I think this is good. So those are the 3 of the 4. Or did they interview 3,000 people? Or sorry, 4,000 people. And of the 4,000, 3,000 of them have said yes. So that's what I look for. And it's like research saying, okay, let's look at the viability of the color black. Which shades of black do you like on a scale of 1 to 5? But there's no question that says, well, do you like black at all? So you're almost pigeonholed to say, yeah, okay, you're assuming I like black, so I'm going to answer your questions. So when it comes now, it's kind of a long way of saying when we talk about first impressions, okay, you've now talked to me. Okay, I'm now talking about a point called first impressions. Now let me give you an opinion on your first impression. Yet when I meet you for the first time, your first impression doesn't really matter to me. It's what can you help me with from a business perspective, given that, if you're meeting customers, or how are you as a person when I meet you for coffee? Are you the type of person that I want to continue going for coffee with or have a beer because we just enjoyed such a great conversation? And that's that trust that is such a comforting feeling that when you call or I see you calling, that your intuition is going, it's Thomas. And then to say, I had a great time with him last time. Let's have a good chat. Hey, you want to go for coffee again? That's how it works, right? And I'm just distilling it down to a bit of science.
I might need it. So, and in your example, you did use being on stage, and I watched the TEDx talk. It's very good. Did you want to share anything about that experience and how it's received by people?
Yeah, it really. A lot of people didn't. First of all, they didn't understand how complex intuition was. But they really, the comments that I typically get from those who watch the TEDx talk is that they were really, really engaged in really taking an understanding about intuition, and really opened up, them either reaching out to me or asking about it, or, at least getting them to my website to say, hey, listen, I loved your TEDx talk. It's really interesting what you do. So this is the kind of feedback that I've done. And it really got to a lot of people. Like if you looked at, there were 12 of us that did the that TEDx thing. And of the 12, I was swamped with people afterwards. And so if you want to use that as in kind of indication of the interest level of my talk, I would take that as people really asking questions about these signals, some of the examples. I was actually talking even in Stockholm to a bunch of accountants, and a bunch of people are saying, oh my God, you're talking to accountants. And well, they all have intuition as well. And after the talk in Stockholm, I had, I was doing some book signings and stuff like that. And there was one person, she was from Poland, and she came up to me and said, I loved your talk. And she says, let me tell you a story. And she had a beautiful marriage, 2 kids, and something was telling her something was off with her husband. She didn't know. She said, everything was good. We kissed each other in the morning. Everything was lovely, dinners, but something was telling me something was off. And when she did her digging, what she found out was that her husband was cutting her out of the bank accounts, and there was some processes going on. And she said, had I not stepped in, I would have lost access to all my bank accounts, and I would have been on the road with my 2 daughters. And I eventually confronted him, and there was nothing. She didn't think that there was anything to trigger it, but it was clear that her intuitive signals were saying something's off in his behavior, or maybe perhaps why he's going to the bank twice a week when he's gone once a month before. Whatever it is, she was not able to pin it. And so what I find is when people look at my TEDx talk, or they come to hear me speak, or we engage in a Zoom meeting, every single person has a topic of when they ignored intuition, and it got them to a really bad place. And what happens too often, unfortunately, is that when you're on the way down, even though your intuition is sending you these signals all the time, your focus is on the slippery slope down. You forget to look up to take a look at the signals. And when you hit rock bottom, there's only one place to look, is up. And finally you say, oh my God, my intuition was there all the time. And that's what helps you out of that situation.
Great answer.
Thank you.
What are your goals, Sunil?
My goals is to help as many businesses be as successful as they can by living through a really purposeful mission, one business at a time, and just to leave this education of intuition because I don't think anybody's done this much, taken this much of a deep dive into intuition. And if I can just make people aware of these signals, I can help better their lives. And I'm putting my money where my mouth is with my two kids, and the success they want through the missions that they have with their nonprofits that they want to run. But it's really about impacting other people and teaching them lessons of, don't let other people tell you what to do. You have these signals, listen to it, and live life to your fullest, right? Based on what's right for you. And all that has to be wrapped up in the intuition, the signals and their experiences, and they're allowed to fail. Failure is amazing because it's another data point for your intuition. And so, I'm just, and that makes me happy. That makes me incredibly happy. And, there's no better way to live life than if you can live every single day happy that you've left some mark somewhere, and the work that you do leaves marks somewhere, and it's going to affect someone. I think it's a great place, a great way to live.
Is there anything I should have asked you about today?
The one thing is, if you make the decision to ignore your intuition, there's something called opportunity cost. And opportunity cost, and the best way to explain this is through, again, another interview with someone I did. His name is Vin Jiang. Vin Jiang was someone who is, he's an international keynote speaker. And in 2016, this guy was earning over 7 figures, 100,000 people, 80 stages a year. His life looked amazing. Yet his intuition was saying, externally, you're happy. Internally, you're a wreck. And in 2016, he finally said, I'm done. I got to fix this. And so he goes away to a place in New Zealand, takes some pens and notepads and stuff, and he starts putting up these things which he thought were his values on the wall. And he looks at them and he says, that's what my wife wants. That's what my manager wants. That's what this person wants. That's what the audience wants. Where the heck is Vin Jiang? And he takes these values off and he puts down his own values. As hard as it was, what does he want in life? And what he thought was going to be a cathartic experience, he's going to live through his life, through his values. And it was very haunting because he says for the first time in his life, he's actually living his life for him. So he goes back home, ready to listen to his intuition, and he falls back in the same old lifestyle. And 6 months goes by, and his parents come up from Australia, and he's Vietnamese in background. And his mother pulls him aside and says, there's this saying in Vietnamese, when you hang around squid, you're going to get some ink on you. You have a lot of ink on you. This is not my boy. And so 6 months goes by, and he finally makes the decision to cut out everybody who was caustic in his life, forget the downtown LA apartment, get rid of the brands, get them in a van, live out in the boonies, and really be fulfilled as to who he was. And so when it comes to opportunity cost, when I was interviewing him for the podcast, one of the things I told him was, Vin, this is how opportunity cost works. It wasn't just the 6 months that you lost ignoring your intuition again. It's also the 6 months that you lost that you could have gained by trusting your intuition. So you actually lost a full year of your life. And if you're in the business of helping 100,000 people a year improve their lives, how many people did you leave behind? How many people did you let down? And he said, I've never, ever thought about life like that way. So when you ignore your intuition and when you make a decision, the cost to you is going to be sometimes twice or more. So never ignore those signals, ever.
You're a very good storyteller. Did you know that?
No, but I get very passionate about these examples because I think they hit home.
All right. Well, for people who want to know more, where can they find you?
Yeah, they can just go to sunilgodse.com. Everything's there. I'm also on the socials, LinkedIn, Twitter. I'm on TikTok. I don't do any dances because I'm sure that it's going to trigger some intuition of others not to look. And Facebook, Instagram. Send me a DM, contact me, watch my webinar, watch my TED. However you want to engage with the content, please do.
You're a great guest and very easy to listen to. Sunil,
Thank you.
thank you very
Thank you.
much.
I appreciate that. Thank you.